Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you.
It's been good to it's good to have you, even though we had some unfortunate circumstances. But
Yeah, I'm so sorry I couldn't make it out. I was really looking forward to being there, but unfortunately the dates on passports don't actually mean anything. They actually want you to renew them, I don't know, 6 months ahead of time, before they'll actually let you go anywhere. So
yeah, I have invited someone else to do this panel with me. I think you have already met him once, Doc Anubis.
Hey, Doc.
I annoyed you at GalaCon last year for a while.
I remember. I don't remember being annoyed. I do remember meeting you. That was wonderful. Thank you. I saw your name on the panel list, and I thought, I wonder if Doc will be there. So
I thought Doc is a massive fan of the comics, so he'd be better suited to have a chat with you about the comics than I am. So that's why I got him here.
So that you don't have to write any questions. Yeah, I wrote down a few questions for you in hopes that, the attendees will find some of that, what I would find interesting as well. But first, for me to thank you for joining us, even over this a little bit scuffed way. I've been looking forward to this and have like a nice little document with a bunch of questions.
yeah, absolutely.
And I think we can just jump right in.
Yeah, if that's good with you.
Yeah.
We're going to have some questions from Anubis first, and then we're going to see if we get some Q&A from the audience about your work on the comics.
Yeah, I think for anybody who doesn't know, I've been writing for the My Little Pony comics, I think roughly 10 years, and a total of what were written as contributions for 60 different issues ended up being 58 due to them changing the size of issues and things like that. But I still maintain I wrote 60 issues. I've written, for better or worse, more pony comics than anybody else.
Yeah, we'll count it as 60 issues. Storm of Sapphire Heights may have been cut short, but it's 60. It's the same length.
They still publish the issues. They just made them double-sized instead of 5 issues.
So we still got the entirety of it. But I would jump right in with some stuff about season 10, because that is, to me, one of the most interesting things you have written. And for that, I wanted to ask, which of the homelands that you had to write for season 10 was the most interesting to write? Like the homelands of the different different species that were introduced during season 10.
I think they all had sort of their own. There are things I love about all of them, but I think in particular my favorite to write was probably Zakora's. Was probably getting to write this variety of other magical horse type creatures that in Zakora's homeland, partially because I'd been pitching Zakora stories since I guess since I started on the comic, and there was always this worry that if we started doing something in the comic, they would decide in the show that they were going to explore where Zakora was from, and then they'd end up contradicting. And so as soon as the show ended and they were like, we want to do a season 10, we want to carry on this story, my first pitch was like, okay, now you can't tell me that maybe they'll do something with Zakora. They definitely aren't. The show is over. So let's jump into that and actually do something. And it was really exciting to get to do that and to get to do it sort of at the length of story that we wanted to.
Yeah. What I also was wondering is, what story took you the longest to write out of your 60 issues that you've written?
Out of all the 60 issues, that's a tough one. Season 10, I wrote a lot, but there is a lot there as well. I think The hardest one to write might have been, I can't remember the number on it, but it's the first Friendship is Magic, or one of the first Friendship is Magic issues I did, which we pitched as a silent issue. There's almost no dialogue. It follows just the pets, and is sort of. I started it as I was interested in. They had done a similar story in the show that was Spike and the pets, and my feeling with that was that having Spike there was cheating, because Spike can deliver all the dialogue and the exposition, everything you need to know. Spike can do, and I was like, I want to do something with just the pets, where we have no characters who can actually deliver dialogue. There's no talking in this. It all has to be communicated through the pets and through them. Angel Bunny goes as far as to have a chalkboard at one point where he's writing up things in the background, but that's as close as we get to any of them talking, which sounds like a great idea when you're pitching it, and then when they tell you to, okay, go ahead and write this comic that doesn't have any dialogue in it, you then have to figure out how to write a comic that doesn't have any dialogue in it and still make sense.
Yeah, I remember that issue. I make videos on the comics sometimes, and that was one of the hardest to make a video about, just to tell people what is happening. It was an interesting experience for sure, but yeah, I understand what you mean with the difficulty. You didn't only write for G4, but also for G5. What difference are there between writing for G4 and for G5, if there are any?
I think the adjustment with writing for G5 was realizing all the technology and things that they would have, all the things that they would have, which were explicitly things that were not available to us in G4. That the ponies have cell phones in this series. That we're dealing with cities rather than just these sort of little castles and villages, and that we have a news program in Zephyr Heights, like that. They have TVs. So of course I immediately got rid of all that. I was immediately like, okay, there's a snowstorm and none of this stuff works. So we can't really play with any of that. But it was sort of fascinating after having worked so long in G4, where everything is so steeped in mythology, having G5 be so much more explicitly modern in a lot of ways. You didn't have to find ways around lack of technology. I think it was particularly interesting to me because I think that was one of the first arguments I had with Hasbro when we were working on the comics, is in my first issue, which is very Discord centric, where he's working with the Cutie Mark Crusaders. He at one point he's they're jumping through all these possibilities of what their Cutie Marks could be, of all these things they could be, and one of them was a race car driver, and that was their hard line, is that we could not have internal combustion engines in My Little Pony. Just very specifically, that was the thing that even if Discord was involved, even if it was because of chaos magic, we could not have internal combustion cars. But they were fine with a spaceship in that same issue. So, then having technology in G5 was immediately I was like, oh, well, all of these things that I had to fight with Hasbro about wouldn't have been a problem here.
Yeah, that leads me to something else I wrote down. How much did Hasbro interfere in your writing process? How much freedom did you have when writing for the comics?
Day to day, it was I think rarely an issue. We would run into arguments with them occasionally, because usually what would happen is, either they would bring us an idea of some story they needed us to tell, but most of the time we would bring them an idea of some sort of story we were doing. IDW would approve it, and then it would go to Hasbro for approvals, and then that would go through that same process every step in the process. In most of the comics, that wasn't an issue. There occasionally would be something that we'd bump into that would be suddenly a real pain for us. There's again with Discord, there's a whole issue I did that I had pitched as Discord time traveling, and we'd done this whole story about all of that, and they had approved it, and then we sent in the script, and their biggest note on the script was, we love all the stuff you're doing, we love the sense of humor, we love all the stuff that's in here. The only problem is we can't do time travel in this show. And to which my response was, first of all, that was what we pitched, is time travel. I don't know what you mean we can't do it. But also, you've had time travel in the show. By that point, they had already done the episode where Twilight is attempting to go back and change the past. And I was, basically I had to tell them, like, look, you've already done it in your show. It's already established. You can't say that we can't do it, especially after I've already written the script. And they ended up being fine with that. I think other than that, the the biggest problem we had with bumping up against Hasbro stuff was with season 10, because so much got delayed because of the pandemic. It had started off as we had all these plans in place of things that they had wanted, and then sort of they knew what they were going for. And I think over the course of the pandemic, they were planning G5 at the same time. So what they wanted and what they needed, I think, changed quite a bit while we were working on it. So there were a lot of ideas that were in the pitch for season 10 that didn't make it to the page or had to be altered in some way on the way to the page.
That's actually interesting. What kind of ideas did you have to scrap for season 10 that you would have loved to use?
I think the biggest one that I feel like is notable when you read it is that this sort of final group of villains doesn't seem like they are what we're leading towards. The Knights of Harmony are a little, they feel a little grab baggy to me as far as just the designs, and that is largely a result of we had wanted to do and had originally pitched doing that group as being alicorns, and that they were sort of connected to this history of the Trees of Harmony and everything like that. And that was originally there wasn't a great deal of description of it in the pitch, but they had approved it. And then as they were developing G5, of course, G5 has a lot more to do with alicorns and where they fit into everything. And they were getting ready to have, to introduce the multiple season villain as an alicorn in this story. And so they sort of shut that down. They were like, you have to figure something else out for these characters to be. At that point, we were already, halfway through the season. And so they, basically just gave us the, make them something different, something we haven't seen before. And so they end up being something that feels sort of comes out of left field in some ways. Because, we at the last second, we're told we couldn't make them alicorns.
Yeah, G5 definitely goes deep into the alicorn, so I get that they wanted to change that, but yeah, it's confusing to suddenly have all these new species that all supposedly come from the same country. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was that was sort of a last minute thing. They had to basically, at that point, they were just like, we need you to start designing things, and it was at that point whatever could get through approvals, because it was already we were already supposed to be, or our artists were already supposed to be drawing it by that point. That we had to sort of redesign what our villains for not just the arc but the season at that point would look like, and so they ended up being what they are, which is a little does feel a little bit strange.
Yeah, the designs actually at least looked cool at the end, even if they feel a little bit out of place.
And that is all credit to Andy, because Andy was just sort of put in the position of like, okay, figure out what Hasbro will approve that that looks cool and intimidating enough to have possibly been, the villains of this whole season.
So Andy came up with most of the designs. Does that go for like most of the comics you've written, that the artist worked more on the designs, or how much were you involved with the designs of the original characters, for like Ares, for example?
Eris is an interesting one because I wanted to do something that felt related to Discord, but from a different mythology. And she's based on a magical bird from mythology in the Philippines that is also to do with luck and chance. And so I had sort of brought them a handful of like, okay, this is the sort of creature I want it to be based on, and I want it to feel like it's distantly related to Discord in some way, like it is the Discord of this world. They sort of ran away with it and designed the character, and immediately, like, this was, I think, their first draft of what Eris should look like, and was a hit for me. It was immediately like what I was looking for, so worked perfectly.
Speaking of Discord, we know you like to write Discord a lot. What is the most fun about writing characters like Discord?
I think probably the most fun is it opens up a lot more story possibilities. You can really do anything with Discord. And I think for me as a writer, I love stories that are fun, but also have sort of these heartfelt feelings in them. I love, and this is not just in Pony, but in a lot of my work, I love like making people laugh, having fun, getting into this role of like, oh, isn't this fun? And then sort of like backhanding them with emotions when they're not expecting it. Just making people go immediately from laughing to crying is sort of, that's my favorite trick to pull in these things. And I think Discord he's so full of both possibilities and also a lot of like, he's got a lot of emotions. And when you've lived that long and been through all the stuff he has, you deal with, you've dealt with a lot of different things. So he occasionally has the chance to sort of throw out there some feelings you might not see coming. So I think, it's sort of fun to play with what you can do with him, and what the audience will and won't expect.
Okay, what character outside of Discord is your favorite to write? This Discord would be the easy answer, so I wanted something else.
Oh man, there's a lot of different characters that are a lot of fun to write. I think I can narrow it down, I think, to two beyond Discord, in that I really love writing reformed villains who maybe aren't entirely reformed, which is why I love Tempest so much. That Tempest is, especially in the Nightmare Nights story miniseries that we did, and in season 10, that Tempest is very like, okay, I know how we could subjugate all of these people, all of these, ponies or whatever they are in this case, zebras, and I understand that maybe that's not what we want to do, but if we did want to do that, here's how we would do that. So I love she's so grumpy and mean, and I love sort of like writing her trying to be good and not being very good at being good. And also I love Luna for a lot of the same reasons, because like Discord, there's so many possibilities with her, but also she has so many emotions. And also I get to do the big voice thing that she does occasionally, and her Royal Canterlot voice, and sort of play with that, because she is a lot of fun to play with and sort of figure out what works for her and what doesn't. I think the story with her and Discord, where she is going through Discord's dreams and trying to help him figure out what's wrong with him, is one of my favorites, just because you get these two characters who, as far as the show is concerned, initially are villains, but like have so many feelings and emotions and issues, and they're trying in both cases so much to be good, but have so much working against them for that.
Oh yeah, the look into Discord's mind in that story was incredibly fun, and probably the epitome of what you can do with Discord, the possibilities that he opens. But this love for these kind of characters, is that where the idea for Nightmare Nights came from? Just they want to play more with characters like Luna and Tempest?
Oh, absolutely. I had pitched Nightmare Nights, in fact, to Bobby and to our editor at the time as My Little Pony Suicide Squad. It's like, what if we just did a story that was all reformed villains? That we had all these characters that had been evil and were trying to do good, and there was something that only the group of them could do, which I think was a lot of fun because they're all characters that I love, and I think characters that I had already, with the exception of Capper and Trixie, had already written quite a bit at that point. And of course, Trixie is an incredibly fun character to write. So the idea of sort of getting to play with all of the most fun characters, I didn't include Discord in that for the specific reason that we were basically having an alternate universe Discord in that story. But everybody else is just like the most fun to play with. So yeah, we got to throw in Tempest and Luna and Capper and Trixie and just have fun with everybody. Oh, and of course the Pony of Shadows as well.
Yeah. And we know that the comics have a lot of like Easter eggs and references hidden in them. Who comes up with more Easter eggs, the writer or the artist? We know from Andy that he comes up with a lot of stuff. Like how much?
Yeah, that's absolutely the artists that do the majority of that. I will throw something in there occasionally if there's a reference I want to make or something that I think really fits. But Andy especially, I think, out of everybody that has worked on the comics, just loves to just sort of keep himself entertained. I think it might be just a side effect that anybody else enjoys what he's doing. He's just doing it for his own fun. But anytime you see a pony dressed like Magnum PI or some sort of recurring background weirdo, it's almost always Andy.
But are there some Easter eggs that you wanted to put in it? Like which one of the ones that you had ideas for would be your favorite? Like any that you liked?
That's an interesting question. I think usually if I'm throwing in Easter eggs, it is something Discord related, because I love to put in just I feel like it's sort of my perspective on Discord that he's watching TV all the time. He knows what's going on in all the alternate universes. He has references to make. So I particularly enjoy, like, in the time travel episode, there's a point where, like, there's several references to Doctor Who in that one, including him throwing Doctor Who's out of the time machine, the fact that the time machine is smaller on the inside, the fact that at one point when they go to the future, they run into, I don't think we ever named them on the thing, but they are definitely cyber ponies in there. So that was, those are a lot of fun. I also really enjoy, like, in that first story with the Cutie Mark Crusaders, we also throw in references to, like, there's a whole page that's a reference to Power Rangers. There's a Star Trek: The Next Generation one, which is might be my favorite reference that I ever wrote into a comic. Is that, like, basically the Cutie Mark Crusaders are driving the Enterprise more or less, and when Discord pops up to warp them to another place, he's wearing the Q costume, from Next Generation, which is of course the same voice actor. So it was a fun little like reference to throw in there. But yeah, those are always my favorite bits.
Yeah, we know that the comics have a lot of different, very talented artists. How do the artists differ when working with them? What are the and I don't want to ask who your favorite is because that's kind of mean, but like, how do they differ? What makes them special, and like, what makes them fun to work with?
They're all really great to work with. There's a lot of like differences between them. Andy has obviously, his own sort of style with adding in stuff in the background and making it more fun. Tony was the first person I worked with at all on this. My first several comics were he and I working on them. And Tony is like, Tony always has ideas on stuff, but he'll sort of throw them at you and ask permission. Andy will just throw them in there wherever he feels like it. I think Agnes's stuff is always very cute. So, I think especially with like the sort of more traditional My Little Pony friendship stories, the one-off stories, her stuff works really well with that. Whereas I think, Tony and Brenda also is one of my favorites to work with. Her stuff is very good for, big sort of epic stories. We worked together on the Sombra stuff early on when we got to do Sombra's origin, and then a lot of Legends of Magic she did stuff for as well. So her stuff is wonderful and has sort of that grand fantasy feel to it, which I really love.
Speaking of Legends of Magic, that was like a kind of special case where the show and the comics kind of worked together alongside to get the pillars out to the public. Did that differ in any way, like working on that specific story differ in any way to the other stories that you wrote because it was so closely tied to the show?
Yeah, it was really interesting because I think at that point, Hasbro had sort of changed what they wanted to do with the regular monthly comics. And I think people who read them regularly will probably have recognized this, that they were really closely tied to the show at that point, and that their concept for it basically was that every issue of the comic would be like a sequel to an episode of the TV show. And I was not a huge fan of that. I did, I think, only one of those, and I'd sort of decided after the bingo story I did, which I did because I am also a big fan of the Golden Girls, as the people making the show obviously were. But after that, I decided I didn't think I was going to do any more pony comics. I was just sort of going to take a step back, not dramatically quit or anything like that. But it wasn't as much fun as just sort of pitching my own ideas. I had decided at that point I wasn't going to do any more. And then Bobby said, look, they're looking to do this thing where they're going to introduce these characters in the show, and there's not going to be a great deal of time for them to establish their character and establish a lot of their background. And I know you love doing lore. Would you be interested in sort of building these characters out and, staying within the confines of what they have established about them? You're basically free to do whatever you want. And I was like, well, that sounds great. That's much more interesting to me than trying to make sequels to episodes of the TV show. And I really loved getting to sort of play in the fantasy mythology of the world. I also really love getting to write a character whose primary power is that he's really good at digging. That he, I don't know how many people have made the connection to the series and movie Mystery Men with him, but that immediately was clear to me that there's a character in Mystery Men who's called the Shoveler, and he at one point is talking about his powers and how he shovels well, and I was like, well, that's Rocco. If his whole thing is I shovel well. So like getting to build out those characters and give them more room to breathe than what the show had time for, was a lot of fun. And Hasbro, for the most part on that, had very few notes. They were just happy to sort of go with whatever. And I think initially their idea was to just sort of do, one story for each of them. But I sort of pitched them on the idea of really getting to fill in that first conflict with the, with the sirens as well. Because we sort of get allusions to that on the show, but we don't see much of it. So like getting each one of them sort of a background mythology story, and then telling the story of the group being assembled and fighting the sirens, was sort of my pitch there, and was a lot of fun to get to do, because you don't get to see those characters interact very much on the screen. Unfortunately, they're moving pretty fast with establishing them in that season, and they're gone before they have a chance to do much with it.
Speaking of what works well on the screen, are there any stories of yours that you would have loved to see adapted more into the actual show? Because while the comics have a large audience as well, the show reaches more people. So is there any of your stories that you would most like to see in the actual show?
It's a good question. I tend to like the bigger stories a bit more, and I think they're better fit for the show in a lot of cases. Just because I think single issue comics tend to be about half the length story-wise of a TV show. It usually takes about 2 comics to adapt a single half-hour episode. So I think probably for me it would be Siege of the Crystal Empire, because that was the first big story I wrote for the comics, and was so much fun, and did so much with, I think, that when we started working with the villains for the month of villain stories we were doing, that was immediately like there's not much there about Sombra, so Sombra will be the most fun to write for, because there's so little to go on that I am free to make up all sorts of things. So that was my one of my favorite things to do, is to give him an origin, and then to get to play more with what we establish in that origin. That I think ended up working out really well, and that Hasbro let us get away with some scarier stuff in there than I was anticipating, which I think would have been great for the show, and also I think treated Sombra a lot better than what he ultimately got when he did reappear in the last season of the show.
Yeah, that was that kind of messed with people because it felt contradictory to the backstory that you've written. I mean, It works out with a little bit of creativity, but on first glance, it does not quite fit anymore. But yeah. You haven't written for just MLP, but also for other publishers, or also published your own stories and stuff. How does working with Hasbro differ to other publishers, or working with IDW?
It is interesting, just because I think that the big difference is there are multiple levels of approval, where IDW will approve things and then Hasbro has to approve them. So there's sort of that constant chain. Whereas, say, if I'm working with Marvel is the one doing the approvals. So I'm sort of talking with the same people that I know we're going to have to sign off on things. So it's a little simpler to figure out what is and isn't going to work, in ways that, writing a licensed comic like My Little Pony especially, but even if it's something like, if I've written a lot for Sea of Thieves, that's a slightly different process, but it has the same sort of multi-tiered sign-offs on things. So it's just going through, I think, multiple levels of figuring out what will and won't work. It's a little harder sometimes to hatch an idea with Hasbro and figure out what they're going to be into, because I'm not speaking with them directly usually.
It's been a few years since you wrote many of these stories, and you have probably grown as a writer since then. Is there anything that you would now change in the stories you wrote for MLP back then, that you realize now you could have done differently or better in your eyes?
I feel like there'll be a lot of people who have read these comics that have answers to that. I would have loved for... I don't know that it's anything that I could change with season 10. I would have liked to for it to have a bit more room, because it was sort of a shifting platform while we were doing it, where we didn't know how long anything was going to get to be, and I had planned longer stories that ended up having to be cut short. Things that had originally been planned as entire arcs ended up in an annual or a 2-issue story. So it would have been nice as a writer to be able to plan for what I was going to get, rather than planning for sort of what the ideal ended up being. I think that's the biggest thing for me. It also would have been nice to be able to sort of have a little more sense of what was going to happen in the show sometime, because occasionally, we would write something and then 6 months later the show would go a completely different direction with it, and suddenly this thing that we'd been really attached to was no longer there. And I think a prime example of that is one of the things that I think, one of the stories I've written that I think the most people actively dislike is I wrote there's a Friends Forever story that takes place in Philadelphia, where we get to see there's a little small dragon neighborhood there, that's set up to be sort of like a Chinatown, where dragons also live there but have their own sort of neighborhood. And then that is very much something that the show ended up going a different way with how dragons and ponies live or don't live together. That it would have been nice to know before I had written the story. And at least to be able to have some kind of consistency, because that it was an interesting and fun concept, but not something that ends up really making sense in the rest of the world.
I do want to circle back to more of your own projects again, because back at GalaCon I read the first issue of Dog Night that I bought from you, and I wanted to ask how different does it feel to write these kind of stories for your own and your actually own stories compared to the stories for the big IPs?
The nicest thing about writing stories of my own is, obviously, I get to write the stories I want to tell, and I don't necessarily have to worry about where a company like Hasbro or even IDW is going to fall on what sorts of things they do and don't want to publish. Specifically, the Dog Knight, my main character in that is a non-binary middle schooler. It's important to me that it's able to deal with those issues, especially with trans kids, even though that isn't what the story is about. It's about a kid who gets recruited by a bunch of talking dogs to help them save the world. But that we have sort of that diversity in there, and that we're able to have a non-binary lead in there, and tell stories that kids need to hear, especially kids who will relate to that character. And that's always really important to me in my personal work, and at times has been an area where I've butted heads, particularly with Hasbro, as to whether they feel trans issues or queer issues or things like that are things that have any place in My Little Pony, which I argue that any place that there are fans and kids that are watching it that are dealing with those issues have a place in the stories. We had a place initially when I started writing on the comic, where they were like, oh, well, we don't want to have these, queer romances because there are no romances on this show. That's just not the kind of show it is. And then I was like, okay, that's fine. And then two ponies got married the next season. And I was like, well, actually, maybe you do have romances in this story. And if you have straight romances, is it really a problem if we have a Lyra and Bon Bon story? I think ultimately, depending on where the company was at the moment, the answers to that are pretty different.
This question comes more out of a personal interest, but how much of G5 did you watch or consume before you started writing Storm of Zephyr Heights?
I ended up watching all of it before I started Storm and Zephyr Heights. Though I didn't know that was the end of it by the time I got there. Unfortunately, the people writing it didn't know that was the end of it when they got there either. But I think for a lot of the G5 series, I had a sort of issue of not knowing what stories I would want to tell in that world, and knowing that if I got a chance to tell a big story, I wanted it to some way tied to G4 because that was something we could do in the comics that they couldn't necessarily do in the show. And so that was basically the concept for Storm and Zephyr Heights sort of came out of a conversation that I had after watching the rest of the show. I had sat down with Dusty Cat and was having a sort of a long conversation about hey, what sort of stuff do we want to see in G5 that doesn't exist, and what do we want to know about that isn't there yet? So of course Dusty's answer was Rainbow Dash, because that's always Dusty's answer. And my question was not just Rainbow Dash, but there was an entire civilization that is based on the fact that because of magic they can live up in the clouds, they can fly, and that city is clearly gone. That we don't have a place in G5 for a Cloudsdale. By the sort of laws of magic, it can't exist. So what happened to Cloudsdale? And that was very much the birthplace of that story, and sort of working backwards from there. But yeah, I had seen the whole thing by that point, because that was still something that was bothering me by the end of the show.
You mentioned Dusty Cat in your answer. Are there any other interactions you had with the fandom that really stuck with you, or because you've been to a few conventions? So, are there any memorable interactions that you had with the fans that would be interesting to share?
Tons. I've gotten to be friends with several people in the fandom over the years. Dusty Cat obviously is wonderful. I think anybody who's met Dusty is probably friends with Dusty. He's very easy to get along with. My friend TJ, who goes by the illustrious Q, he used to run a lot of the comics content online, has sort of become a proofreader for me with a lot of non-pony stuff as well, but was also sort of my, if I needed to know deep lore, if there was something that I was like, hey, have they ever covered this in any secondary material? Q always knows. He's read the Diary of the Two Princesses, and every other secondary source that they've made, because it was always my intention, as much as the show didn't always pay attention to what we were doing in the comics, I wanted to make sure that I didn't write something that contradicted something somebody else had written in some other third-party media thing. So Q and I went back and forth on a lot of little have they ever explained this? What is the deal with this thing? Sort of questions. But I go to a lot of PonyCons, and I love hanging out and chatting with people at shows. And I think one of my favorite things is, I think I did not the last, but the second to last BronyCon, and I had my Sugar Skull Twilight Sparkle variant of I think it was Fiendship is Magic #1, that had, been sort of one of my comps for that, but ended up being an incredibly rare variant. And I didn't know what to do with it, so I brought it there, and everybody who was working on the comic signed it, as well as Tara, and that thing ended up going for an insanely large amount of money. I want to say in the tens of thousands. And then it was incredible to get to see. I think it's incredible at all of these shows to see how much the Brony fandom gives back. Because I do so many conventions for just general comics and things like that, where there's so little sort of thought of charity or of really support for creators. And I think that's something that the Brony community is great at doing, is both coming out and supporting people, but also I know, having done GalaCon last year, they were auctioning tables off of the stage at one point. So the amount of support that people really have in the Brony community for giving back to charity is incredible to me.
Yeah, it's an important thing here too. With what was the charity this year called again?
Transvisie.
Yeah, for trans youth here in the Netherlands. You have a fitting shirt on for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
This has become my doing panels on it shows shirt. So
Love it.
Very fitting, very on topic for this convention. One more thing that I wanted to ask was, are there any stories that, if you ever had the chance to work with Hasbro again, what kind of stories would you want to write in the future? I mean,
that's a great question.
The comics have been picked up again by another publisher, so who knows? Maybe something will happen in the future. So.
I mean, that would be lovely. I am not sure what is going to happen. I have heard that Boom, who has the rights, I think as of the beginning of next year, plans on reprinting a lot of the existing comics, a lot of which have been out of print for a while. Because I'm really hopeful that they really go through and reprint a lot of the content there, because I am a particular. I really loved writing Nightmare Nights, and I have a lot of people ask me about that miniseries, and it has not been available to buy anywhere for a couple of years now. They only did one sort of print run of the trades, so I'm excited for a company to have the rights to that seems to want to print a lot of the stuff and to do something big. My hope also is that I don't know how many people know this, but Michael Kelly, who is the editor-in-chief at Boom Studios, used to be our approvals guy at Hasbro. So he used to work for Hasbro, and it used to be him that would give us notes on anything that went through. And it was my first time meeting Michael was when we did a My Little Pony panel at San Diego Comic-Con one year, and it was while Siege of the Crystal Empire was coming back, or was in the middle of happening. And my biggest concern when we were making that was that the designs for the villains in that story are too scary. Because for anybody who've read it, they're basically shadowy horse skeletons. Which when Andy drew it, I thought, there is no way Hasbro's going to sign off on that. And Michael signed off on it, and then when I met him at San Diego Comic-Con, the first thing he told me was oh, I really loved Siege of the Crystal Empire, and I love these creatures. I love sort of this part of the world. So we had always wanted to do more with sort of the end of that story. We have sort of, Sombra and Hope sort of go off to go do a thing at the end of that story, and it's always something I would have liked to do to be able to follow them. And my hope is maybe, if that's something Boom is interested in doing and following up those kind of stories, that we can follow up stuff like that never sort of, there were very few sequels to comics within the comics, and I would love to have done more stuff with Sombra and Hope in that story.
I have one more question, then we actually through my entire script document.
Well, now we should finish it before getting to the audience. So go ahead.
Yeah, just another personal thing. What character that you have written for would you like to spend time with the most, and what would you do? I know Discord is an easy answer again, so I would require two answers: Discord and the second one.
I don't know that I want to spend time with Discord at all, because I don't think that I don't think that Discord is going to make your life easier. Whatever he decides to do, whatever you want to do, he's probably going to do. You want to do something to mix that up and to make it more fun for him, not necessarily for you. I think out of, let's see, all the characters that I've written in there, that's a tough one. There's a lot of characters that I like. Obviously, I love Luna. I love a lot of them. I think maybe the one that would be most fun to just hang out with, though, is Rockhoof. I love that guy. I'm not that big into digging, but maybe he seems like the sort of pony who'd love to get a couple of pints.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Anubis. And with that, now you have picked Jeremy's brain. Let's see if there's any questions from the audience for Jeremy. Don't be shy, there's a microphone over there. You can line up if you want.
I'll need to get ready for my own.
And Anubis is
I have
gonna go to his own panel.
Yeah, I have my own panel in a bit, and I need to get ready for it myself. But it was fun picking your brain with everything I could think of.
Yes, thanks so much. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, Anubis. Don't forget the D-mic first. Yep.
Hello, I'm not sure where to look. Good to see you. Glad you mentioned Siege of the Crystal Empire. That was my favourite arc, so great job on that. Fantastic. My question is, did you get be given a remit by Hasbro, like what age to write for? Because that story in particular, and someone's like, it seems more mature in age, like both in Andy's art and your writing. Was there ever a remit from Hasbro saying, write for a bit older, or write for everyone, or?
Not really. I think my guideline with that was always, a little bit what they did in the show, but I think for me, having grown up, I was born in the 80s, as a lot of the 80s and 90s, I would try to sort of aim a little bit for Jim Henson Company, right? Like the Dark Crystal or Labyrinth or things like that, where it's I think kids like something that can be a little spooky, that can be a little scary, that has a little more, that feels a little bit more mature, at least, to kids. I've never really believed in writing down to kids. And obviously there's a lot of lessons to teach about friendship that don't require having quite so epic magical journeys. But it's always been my philosophy that as long as you're not writing things that are explicitly for mature audiences, kids don't need to be written down to.
Fair enough. Thank you.
No problem.
I have another question. Hello there. If it's not too personal, is there any real-life person or situation from your life that inspired something you created? There's probably a lot, but if there's anything you want to share, I'd be curious.
Yeah, there are a lot of bits of things in stories that are, important, I think, especially as it deals with, as I've tried to deal with characters who are queer or trans or non-binary in stories, there's a lot of influence from the real people in my life that are those things as well. And it is important to me for that representation to exist out there. And in season 10 of the comics, one of Zecора's friends, we sort of quietly slid in there as being non-binary. Um, it's not something that was sort of advertised in the comic because I think Hasbro was not particularly feeling like having progressive representation at that time, but they are always sort of referred to by they them pronouns, which we just sort of did, and then it came out, and then we were like, look, they're non-binary. So that was important. I think the most obvious representation or adaptation of somebody from real life is my friend Jen Blake, who was an artist on the series, specifically illustrated the Diamond Tier and Silver Spoon Friends Forever story that I did. Was a lovely, wonderful person, and got very sick while we were making the comics. And if and as you're reading season 10, there's a story with the Diamond Dogs, where their queen is named Jen and has sort of the same hairstyle Jen did, of sort of her hair brushed over one eye. But yeah, she's very much named after and representing Jen in that story, and is sort of an obvious homage to a person that I love.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the answer, and also for
Thanks.
making an effort to represent trans people.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. My audience queue is empty. So I want to thank you very much for joining us in this way with everything that happened. We're
Yeah,
glad
my
to still
pleasure.
have you. We hope
Oh, yeah, I would love to come. Hopefully, I'll get this passport thing sorted out, and hopefully, in the future we can make this happen again.
surely talk about it for a future edition. We'd love to have you sometime.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think I'm gonna end the panel now. Unless there's
Thank you.
someone who still has a question or you have a message for the audience.
I mean, my biggest hope is that people will go out there and check out these comics. Hopefully, a lot of them that aren't in print will be back in print soon. And if you enjoy my work and are interested in seeing more of my stuff, especially if you are interested in stories that have non-binary characters, this is actually my banner for the Dog Knight behind me, which is a middle grades non-binary hero who's recruited by a bunch of magical dogs to help them save the world. That is out there as well in comic book stores. You can pick that up, as well as my current book, Navigating with You, which got a Stonewall honor this year as a sort of a queer love story. So definitely check those out if you get the chance. And yeah, hopefully look out for more Pony comics in the future. We'll see what Boom decides to do, but they picked up the license, so who knows what'll happen.
Awesome, thank you very much. Can I have an applause for... I don't know if you can hear it, but they're clapping for you.
Thank you.